notice just how many engines the Volkswagen Group have in current production, let alone all the ones they've produced over the years? So when you're buying a Volkswagen Group car, which includes Seat, Audi, Skoda, and obviously Volkswagen, and you also find them in lots of other makes and models as well, which one should you decide? Well, I can't answer the question for you personally, because that's like saying what is the best food in the world, and there will be a million different opinions. And it also depends on what you need. Do you want something quick and on the go, or do you want something a little bit more fancy? The same is exactly true of engine choices. It's a personal thing, and it depends very much on your use of the car, your requirements of the engine, and what you're going to be doing with it. We're just going to look at some of the main engines out there, just help you to decide which one would be most appropriate for you. So at the end of this video, we're actually going to discuss the model years, because there's certain years I would probably avoid, not avoid like the plague, but if I had an option of getting a car that was outside of this range of years, I would certainly do so. And I'll explain why I have that opinion. And again, please let me know in the comment what your thoughts are and whether you agree with. So first up, it's an engine we've spoken a lot about on this channel. There's a lot of followers that have this specific engine. There's a great number of projects out there on this 1.8T, the 20 valve engine. That's one of the earlier engines. It's regarded as many as the ultimate project engine. So whether you agree with that or not, please let me know in the comments. But if you're a Volkswagen aficionado, then the 1.8T 20 valve does deserve a special place in the ranking order of best engines for projects. There's so many options, there's a lot of expertise out there, and people have extracted phenomenal amounts of power from what is a relatively simple but very well made and well designed block. The downside of the 1.8T is that it's getting on a bit now. These engines are starting to go up in miles. They're starting to require a lot more work. But if you were getting a project engine, you would probably strip it down and look to rebuild it. And it would certainly be worth thinking about going back to one of those 1.8Ts. Some people have described it as one of the last true analog engines. It's not surrounded by a plethora of electrical devices and sensors and impulses and economy and fuel saving tweaks that have been made to the engine to meet emission standards. So there's certainly a lot you can do with that engine to play with it. But for a lot of people, that's just going to be too old. It's going to require too much work to get a decent project going with that engine. So let's look at some of the more modern engines. You've obviously got the 2-litre TFSI engine, which is phenomenal. It's probably one of the most popular petrol or gasoline engines out there in the Volkswagen Group. It's fitted in so many different models. It's a versatile block. It can be fitted transversely and longitudinally. It can be found in fairly small cars like the Golf, and it's also been put in the larger engine cars like the Volkswagen Passat, and the wide range of other models it fits in is just a testimony to how flexible this engine is. There's been a number of revisions over the years, so we're going to talk at the end of the video about all the different revisions to engines and which year is the most appropriate for your specific requirement. So the 2-litre TFSI is phenomenal. It makes really good power. So that engine has quite a wide range of different power options. There's a number of different turbos that have been fitted to it over the years. The Gen 2, Gen 3 and Evo revisions all get progressively better. The downside of some of the more recent ones is they've been designed to maximize emissions and efficiency. So they're not regarded by many as being as tunable as some of those early engines. But they're certainly still good project engines and they make phenomenal power. It's probably fair to say that a lot of the tuning has been done at the factory, so you're just looking to make modest enhancements rather than being able to make massive power gains. Obviously, it depends on your budget. If you're willing to spend a lot of money on any engine, you will make higher power figures. So let me know what your thoughts are on the 2-litre TFSI. So we can't really mention the 2-litre TFSI without also mentioning its slightly smaller sister, the 1.8 TFSI. It shares so much design DNA together. They're often regarded as very, very similar engines by people. They, in fact, do share a lot of components. So the 1.8 TFSI is slightly slower, it's slightly down on power, but it does give you a little bit more fuel economy. So that might be a consideration if you're looking for an engine and you're not looking to upgrade it to ridiculous levels. The 1.8 TFSI may be a good option, but pretty much anything we say about the 2-litre TFSI also applies to the 1.8 TFSI. So they're both very good engines. They offer a lot to the tuner. Again, look out for the more recent ones. These had quite a few major revisions over those early ones and don't suffer from those early problems that we often saw. We've also got the 2.5 TFSI, which was generally reserved for the RS models in the Audi range. The more sporty versions of the models in the Volkswagen Group had the 2.5 TFSI. It's a 5-cylinder. It makes phenomenal amounts of power. It shares a lot of commonalities in its design philosophy with the 2-litre TFSI. And again, there's quite a few different upgrades and parts out there. As these were fitted to higher performance cars, you generally find that they're equipped with the stronger components, the better flowing fuel injectors, and you have a little bit more headroom on those to actually extract a little bit more power in your tuning project. The downside, though, is they often cost more to run. They're more heavy on fuel usage, and the insurance costs are generally higher on any car with a 2.5 TFSI. And a lot of the tax regimes in different countries, you will pay more road tax or more tax to use those cars or those engines. So if the environmental impacts, the fuel economy and everything was going to worry you, you shouldn't really be looking at a 2.5 TFSI. And maybe the 2-litre TFSI is a better bet for you. But also, I have to mention the 1.4 TFSI and the later 1.5 TFSI. These seem to be really, really nice engine. It's the one that I chose. It gives a really good mix of fuel economy and performance when you actually need it. I've done other videos that goes into detail on the 1.4 TFSI, and I'll be doing other videos as I upgrade mine and add more mods and upgrades to it. I'll be documenting these in vlogs over the coming months and years. So stay tuned if you want to find out more about the 1.4 TFSI. But the engines are really solid. We're talking specifically about the newer versions. The EA111s, the twin charge versions, did have a notorious problem with reliability. There are lots of issues. Again, if you know what to look out for, they shouldn't be dramatically bad issues. They're things that you can work around and mitigate wherever possible. But the 1.4 TFSI is a good, sensible choice if you want a decent runaround car that's economical, but also is fun to drive and has the performance. And with a remap, you can really lift the power quite simply. So it's probably not the engine that you would make significant power gains on. There's not a lot of massive bolt-on parts that will make significant power. And there's a few little nuances to look out for, like some of them have the variable valve timing on the intake and the exhaust, whereas some of the lower powered versions just had it on the intake. And that certainly makes a difference to the way the turbo spools up and perhaps limits your choices slightly when it comes to upgrading those engines. So make sure you have a decent base to work from in your project. But the 1.4 and 1.5 TFSIs are certainly worth thinking about. The 1.5, interestingly, started to use the Atkins cycle, which is very different from the conventional Otto cycle, where the intake is left open a little bit longer, and that maximizes the economy. The 1.4s also came with a cylinder on demand or an active cylinder technology, whichever brand of the Volkswagen Group you go to. They seem to give these things different names, but the general idea was that at low load conditions, 2 cylinders shut down. So effectively, instead of a 4-cylinder engine, you've only got a 2-cylinder engine. And that's what I've got in my car. You hardly notice it cutting in. And it is really good for fuel economy. And it seamlessly goes back to 4 cylinders when you need that little bit of performance. We've got to talk about the diesel engines in the range, because these are quite phenomenal. They're often overlooked by people, particularly in other countries. In the UK, the diesel engines have quite a good following and are quite popular. But a diesel engine will generally give you very good performance and excellent economy. And with a diesel engine, it doesn't seem to matter how hard you drive it. You always seem to get reasonable fuel economy from it. Whereas with a gasoline or petrol engine, if you thrash it, you really hammer the fuel economy. So diesel engines are certainly worth thinking about. If the fuel costs in your area are starting to spiral, and that's a major consideration, then going for a diesel will certainly mean that you're paying less out for fuel and you're still having a performance engine. There's obviously the 1.9 TDI, which is an older engine from the Volkswagen Group. They didn't keep it going. They switched over to the 2-litre TDI, probably by means of emissions regulations. They redesigned the engine to meet those emissions regs, and the 1.9 was just dropped from the lineup. But the 1.9 TDI is often regarded by some as the finest diesel engine that the Volkswagen Group have ever made. The 2-litre TDI, there were some problems in certain years. Again, overall, they get a bad press. They are very good engines. I've had one. I was really happy with mine. And looking at the comments in some of the other videos on it, a lot of other people have seen ridiculously high miles with very little work required to these engines. So if you understand them, you look after them, you keep up with the service intervals, the 2-litre TDIs are phenomenal engines to actually work with and have in your car. With upgrades, you can make phenomenal extra power gains, turbo upgrades, remaps, and fairly simple mods, really. We're just talking bolt-ons. We're not taking the engine apart and starting to rebuild it. But you can get 30 to 40% more power relatively easily and probably double the power of most of these 2-litre TDI engines with a bit more work, considerably more work, obviously, the higher you go up in the power levels. But the 2-litre TDI is certainly worth thinking about, particularly if you want an economical and powerful engine that has that reliability in the long term. So on the 2-litre TDI, the Gen 3 and the EA288 revision that they did, there's some very clever stuff going on to deal with the EGR problem. So the EGR was starting to clog up with soot. Instead of pushing the sooty exhaust from the engine through the EGR into the intake, it now goes through the DPF first, which eliminates a lot of the soot. So that's significantly reduced the risk of soot buildup inside the EGR system. So it's quite a clever fix. It's quite obvious, really. Why they didn't do it initially, I don't know. Probably because they rushed out all of these emission control features to try and meet those ever more stringent emission standards and regulations. Later versions of these engines adopted a drive-by-wire setup, which really removed the analog interface between the driver's foot and the throttle inside the engine. The advanced electronics inside the engine, they went over to a sense system where instead of having sensors and individual wires for each component, they've created a network within the engine where each of the sensors sends an independent signal to the ECU, which certainly enhances reliability. You're less likely to get problems with the signal being interfered with or weird voltage drops just because it's in close proximity to something else. So later revisions of the engine are certainly better than the early ones, although for some people they prefer the more analog approach, the less technologically advanced engines, because they can do more to it themselves at home without specialist knowledge and tools. Another thing to bear in mind is that where different power levels are offered, the higher powered variants invariably have better components. They usually get better quality injectors, larger turbos, stronger forged components, for example. So do your research carefully. If you start with a fairly low power figure, you can spend a lot of money on that, just trying to raise it up to the power figure of the next model up. And it will probably be cheaper for you to go out and get that next model up. But whatever you start with, think of a power gain in terms of a percentage increase over the base power. So the bigger that base power is, the bigger the increase you'll get for your investment in tuning mods and upgrades. So I've not mentioned the 3-litre TDIs, the 2.5 TDIs, the VR6s and the V5s. These are more exotic engines. They're not as popular. The array of parts available, upgrades and tuning them is somewhat limited. There are parts out there. People do tune them and upgrade them, and they are fantastic engines, but I'm not going to recommend them as good for tuning projects because they have a very, very niche following. And unless you fall into a fairly narrow category of person, it's probably not the engine for you. The VR6 and the V5s sound phenomenal. They're one of the best sounding engines, in my opinion, that the Volkswagen Group have ever made. So that alone would warrant consideration in a tuning project. But the nature and the design of these engines does somewhat limit the upgrade. You can still make very decent power, but you need to understand them so they're much more attuned to the enthusiast rather than the beginner just coming in looking for a fairly easy tuning project. So what years would I avoid? Well, from the financial crash in 2008 right up to about 2012, there were lots of quality issues. It wasn't just the Volkswagen Group that suffered these quality issues. It seemed to affect all major car makers, mainly because the global supply chains were somewhat dismantled and fragmented due to the financial crisis. Companies were looking to cut corners, sourcing cheaper parts. New manufacturers that could do it more cheaply were often brought online. And a lot of these parts actually suffered, the quality of the parts suffered. So we see a lot of failures happening just because small electrical parts have failed, or plastic clips have broken, or silly little things have gone wrong in the engine. And we also have the emissions scandal that a lot of manufacturers were also involved in, which typically involved cars around about 2008. So as those emissions regulations started to really tighten up, manufacturers did start to cut corners and start bending the rules slightly in order to meet those emission standards. But by about 2012, everything seems much more sorted out, much more reliable. You've no longer got those inherent silly problems that used to crop up. So I hope this has given you a good overview of all the Volkswagen engines. I've done in-depth videos on each of these engines, so if you want to check them out, check out the engines playlist and you'll find all of these different engines, or go to our website. If you find an article on one engine, it's generally got links to all of the other engines as well in there at the bottom of the article. So you can just get a little bit more of a feel for your project and what would potentially work best for you. Think primarily about your budget, how much you're willing to spend. And for some people, they just want to spend a little bit of money but have a decent power upgrade. Other people really want to strip things down and rebuild it and create the best possible engine that they can. Hopefully with further input from the community on this video and looking at the articles on the website, you'll be much better informed to make a decision when it comes to upgrading your engine and even choosing that engine for your project. So thanks so much for watching. Please boot that like button. It really does help us to get out there. And I've lined this video up for you that you should find interesting. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in this next video.